everyone, I am Anamika Goyal from ABES Engineering College, Ghaziabad. In this lecture, I am going to discuss about the TCP connection management. In this lecture, first we'll discuss about the introduction to TCP protocol. After that, we'll discuss TCP connection establishment process, then TCP data transfer process, and at last we'll discuss TCP connection termination process in detail. So first start our topic, introductions to TCP protocol. TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. It is a connection-oriented protocol. The meaning of connection-oriented is that whenever we want to send data client to server using TCP protocol, first we have to establish a connection between client to server. If I'm talking about the TCP communication services, so TCP communication services can be categorized into three different phases. First phase is the connection establishment phase. Second one is the data transfer phase. And the third one is the connection termination phase. Whenever we want to send data using a TCP protocol, so before transmitting the data, first we'll establish the connection between client to server. After establishing the connection, we'll transfer the data from client to server or server to client both. And at last, whenever client and server don't left any kind of data for further transmission, then we'll terminate the connection between client to server. So for establishing the connection between client to server in connection establishment phase, TCP use three-way handshake method. Right? Now we'll discuss TCP connection establishment, that is the first phase of TCP communication services. In TCP connection termination phase, basically categorized into three steps. That's why it is also known as three-way handshake method. In this method, first the client requests a client to server communication session with the server using SYN segment. So what happened whenever, let us take an example. Suppose a client A want to send some data to the server B. So in that case, what is the meaning of connection oriented? The meaning of connection oriented here is client A sends SYN segment to client B for saying the server that to synchronize with the server. It means client want to send some data to the server. So client send all its information to the server and saying the server that server reserve some resources like CPU, bandwidth, buffer for the client for the clients. After that, the client sends some data to the server. Similarly, in the step number 2, if server is also want to send data to the client, so server will also send SYN packet to the client. So in using this SYN packet, server is also send all its information and saying the client to reserve some resources like CPU, bandwidth, buffer for the server process. So server in step 2, server sends SYN segment plus the acknowledgement of the client SYN packet, right? And the third phase, client will also acknowledge the server SYN packet using acknowledgement packet. So in this way, the connection, proper connection established between client to server. You can see here, this is a TCP client and this one is the TCP server. In first phase, TCP client send SYN segment to the TCP server, and in second phase, TCP server send SYN segment plus acknowledgement of the SYN packet client to server. So TCP server sends SYN plus acknowledgement segment to the client. And after that, in the third phase, TCP client also acknowledge the SYN segment to the TCP server. So in these three-step process, what happened? The proper connection will establish between client to server. To understand this connection establishment process in detail, let us take an example. Suppose in connection established, let us suppose we have a client and server, client A and server B. So for connection establishment phase, first TCP client send SYN segment to the server. In this SYN segment contain TCP header like source port number. For example, the source port number is 10 for client process. Also include destination port address. Destination port address, for example, suppose client want to access some web pages from the server. So the destination port number is 80. In this segment also include a field sequence number. Sequence number, it is a random generated number. For example, it may be 8000. We already told you that it is a random number which lie from the range 0 to 2 raised to the power 32 minus 1. It is a huge number, right? After that, it is a SYN packet. So we have to set the SYN flag value is 1. Here client also send the buffer size of its window, that is window size. For example, in that case, the window size is 2000 byte, right? And the last TCP segment header include options field. In this options field, we specify the maximum segment size, and the value of maximum segment size in that cases is, for example, 200 byte. So in that case, what happens? Suppose this is a client A, and this one is the server V. So at the time of connection establishment phase, client sends SYN segment to the server, right? So after sending this SYN segment, client server will reserve some resources like CPU, bandwidth, and some buffer. If server is also want to send some data to the client, so in that case, server will also send SYN packet which contain all its information, like similarly source port address, that is 80, destination port address, that is 10, sequence number. Again, the sequence number is a random sequence number. For example, in that case, it is a 5000. That is a random number, random generated number. So in that case, because it is a SYN packet sent by the server to client, so the value of SYN flag is 1. Using this segment, server will also acknowledge the client SYN packet. So the acknowledgement field value is also 1. Server will also send its window size with WS. For example, in that case, the window size is 1800, right? And the maximum segment size in that case is 300 byte. So in that case, server will send SYN plus acknowledgement segment to the client, right? Now, at the third phase, client will also send acknowledgement to the server SYN packet for the proper establishment of the connection between client to server. So in that case, the sequence number is 5001, and this the acknowledgement value is 1 because it is an acknowledgement packet. Window size 1800, and also this is the connection, three-way handshake connection establishment for process, right? In this connection establishment process, here we use two terms. First one is the window size, that is 2000 byte, and second one is the maximum segment size, that is 200 byte. What does it mean? The meaning is that in that case, client inform the server, or we can say client saying the server that my maximum buffer size is 200 byte, but but my network cannot expect 200 byte segment in the 200 byte one segment, because whenever we want to send segment from transport layer, it will go to the network layer, then after that the data link layer. If I'm talking about the data link layer, so in data link layer, we use Ethernet frame for the purpose of transmissions of the data from sender to receiver, and the maximum segment size, maximum frame format of Ethernet is less than 1500 bytes. So in that case, the maximum segment size is 200 byte. So it means client is saying to the server that I cannot handle 200 byte one segment. You can send me 200 byte, a small segment, and the total capacity of my window is 200 bytes. So in that case, what happened? In that case, client inform the server can send 200 by 20 frames. ठीक? Right? Similarly, server is also sent that server window size is 1800 byte, or we can and the maximum segment size here is 300 bytes. So in that case, the my whole buffer size is 1800 byte, but at that moment my one segment which I can receive, that will be in 300 byte, right? So you can send me 60 byte, 60 segment, right? So this is basically the connection establishment phase. I hope you understand connection establishment phase of TCP protocol. The next phase, next communication service, TCP communication services, next phase is data transfer phase. This is the second phase. After establishing the connection between client to server, the next phase is data transfer phase. TCP protocol basically work in full duplex mode. It means both client and server can communicate with each other at the same time. So both the client and server can do the data transfer in simultaneously, right? Now the last phase of TCP communication services is the TCP connection termination phase. So, in TCP connection termination phase, when client want to close the connections with the server, so in that case, the TCP client send FIN segment to the server to inform the server that at present at present मेरे पास डेटा नहीं है for further transmission. So in this way I want to close the connection, right? So for closing the connection, client to server, TCP use 3-step or 4-step process for the connection termination. So first we'll discuss the 3-step process for the connection termination, right? Let us suppose we have a client A and server B, and client want to close the connection with the server. So first client send fin segment with the value 1 to the server to inform the server that I want to close the connection because I don't have any data for further transmission, right? So if in case 1, maybe server is also want to close the connection with the client. So in that case, server will also send fin segment with acknowledgement. So fin plus acknowledgement to inform the client that I also want to close the connection because I also don't have any kind of data for the further transmission. In that, what happened? Both client and server want to close the connection. So in that case, in the third step, client is also send acknowledgement to the server to inform that your fin segment will receive successfully. So in that way, what happened? The connection between client to server or server to client terminate properly, right? So this is the three-way connection terminations process. That is case 1. Now case 2, if I am talking about case 2, so it may be possible that when client want to close the connection with the server, but server is not ready to close the connection with that client. So this case is this condition is called half close condition. In that way, we use four-way method for connection termination. In four-way method, we use four step. When the client has no more data to send, it sends segment segment with the fin flag set. The server send an acknowledgement to the client to receive of the fin to terminate the session from client to server. This condition is called half close. In the step 3, the server send a fin to the client to terminate the server to client session, and at last client responds with an acknowledgement ACK to acknowledge the fin from the server. Right. Here you can see that let us suppose this is a TCP client and this one is the TCP server, right? Now TCP client want to send fin segment to the TCP server to inform that TCP client want to close the connection with the server. Now at that moment server have some data for transfer to the client. So in that case server don't want to close the connection. So server just send the acknowledgement to inform the client that server will receive the client fin segment. So in that case what happens? The connection between client to server is closed. In that case client cannot send data to the server, but client can send acknowledgement to the server, because in that case server acknowledgement does not require any kind of resources. When client send a fin segment to the server, so in that case what happened? After receiving the fin segment, server will release all the resources which are reserved from the client. So in that case TCP client not able to send data, but it is able to send acknowledgement. So after some period of time, maybe TCP server want to close the connection with the client. So in that case, TCP server also send fin segment. So what happened after receiving the fin segment from the TCP server? TCP client also release all the resources reserved from the TCP server, and send an acknowledgement to the TCP server to inform that it received the fin segment from the TCP server successfully. So this is a four-step process. In that way, properly connection terminate with the client to server and server to client. In that case, both client and server cannot send data to each other, but they both are able to send acknowledgement to each other. Right? So this is the connection termination phase of TCP. These are references used to design this lecture. Thank you for your patience listening.